You can let go of my arm now, Ethan. I think I can handle the rest. The words came out steadier than I felt as the massive oak doors of St. Augustine Cathedral swung open before us. Every head in that chapel turned toward the sound, and I felt the collective gasp ripple through the crowd like a wave. 350 guests who had just witnessed my sister Clara kick her blind twin out of her own wedding were now watching that same twin walk back in radiant, confident, and arm in arm with the most powerful man in the city. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor about karma and justice. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up being the ones who teach you exactly how strong you really are. And sometimes, just sometimes, walking back into the place that broke your heart becomes the moment you realize you were never actually broken at all. Hey everyone, how are you doing today? I hope you're somewhere comfortable because this story is going to take you on quite a ride. Whether you're watching this from your couch, your bed, or stealing a few minutes during your lunch break, I want you to know this is one of those stories that will stick with you long after it ends. The weather might be changing outside your window, but in here, we're about to dive into a story about family, betrayal, and the kind of justice that only comes when you stop waiting for others to see your worth and start showing it yourself. My name is Celine Monroe, and this is the story of how I went from being the unwanted sister hiding in the shadows to the woman who walked into my twin's wedding with a billionaire on my arm and completely changed the trajectory of both our lives. But let me start from the beginning, because the ending only makes sense when you understand just how far I had to fall before I learned how to fly. I was 26 years old when I still believed that family meant unconditional love. I believed that being twins meant Clara and I shared some unbreakable bond, that blood was thicker than water, and that despite our differences, she would always have my back the way I had always had hers. I believed that my blindness was just one part of who I was, not something that defined my worth or my place in the world. Most of all, I believed that when your sister asks you to be her maid of honor, it means she actually wants you there. The morning of Clara's wedding started like any other day in the Monroe household. I woke up in my childhood bedroom at exactly 6 a.m., ran my fingers along the familiar path to my dresser, and began getting ready for what I thought would be one of the most important days of my life. Clara had been planning this wedding for 18 months, and I had been there for every single decision, every flower arrangement, every menu tasting, every dress fitting. Well, every dress fitting except the final one, but Clara had assured me that was just because the designer was being extra cautious about the alterations. I had learned to navigate the world through touch, sound, and intuition, and I had learned to navigate my relationship with Clara through patience, understanding, and an endless well of forgiveness. She had always been the beautiful one, the popular one, the one who lit up every room she entered. I had always been her quiet shadow, the sister who stayed in the background and made sure she had everything she needed to shine. That morning, as I carefully applied my makeup using the techniques I had perfected over years of practice, I genuinely believed I was getting ready to stand beside my sister as she married the love of her life. I believed I would hold her bouquet, adjust her train, and be part of her perfect day. I had no idea that perfect day didn't include me. The first sign something was wrong came when I heard Clara's voice outside my bedroom door, sharp and frustrated in a way that made my stomach clench. She was on the phone with someone, and her voice had that particular edge it got when she was trying to solve a problem she didn't want to deal with. "I don't care what the seating chart says," she was saying. "Find a way to make it work. The photos need to be perfect, and I mean absolutely perfect. This is going to be in magazines, for God's sake." I heard her hang up and knock on my door. When I opened it, I could smell her perfume, the expensive one she only wore for special occasions, and I could hear the rustle of what must have been her bridal robe. "Celine, we need to talk." Something in her voice made my blood run cold, but I stepped aside to let her into my room. I heard her close the door behind her, and then there was silence for a long moment. I waited, my hands folded in front of me, trying to read the tension in the air. There's been a change of plans, Clara said finally. About the wedding party. My heart started beating faster. What kind of change? Well, August's sister flew in from London last night unexpectedly, and she's really upset that she wasn't included in the original plans. You know how these things are, family politics and all that. His mother is being impossible about it. August Whitfield was Clara's fiancé, heir to a real estate empire that had made the Whitfield name synonymous with luxury development across 3 states. I had met him exactly 4 times in the 2 years they had been together, and each time he had spoken to me with the kind of polite dismissal people reserve for furniture. I don't understand, I said. What does that have to do with me? Clara sighed, and I heard her move to the window. They want Jessica to be in the wedding party. And with the photographer and the way the pictures are going to work out, we think it might be better if you just enjoyed the ceremony as a guest instead. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're kicking me out of the wedding party? I'm not kicking you out, Celine. Don't be so dramatic. I'm just adjusting the arrangements. You'll still be there. You'll still be part of everything. Just from the audience instead of on the altar. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what she was actually saying to me. After 18 months of planning, after years of being her closest confidant, after a lifetime of standing in her shadow and telling myself it was enough just to be needed, she was removing me from her wedding because I didn't fit the picture she wanted to present to the world. Clara, I said quietly, I've been your maid of honor for 18 months. The dress has been altered to fit me. The photographer has the shot list. The programs are already printed. And we'll figure all of that out. Jessica is about your size. The dress will probably fit her just fine. And honestly, Celine, this way you can just relax and enjoy the day without worrying about all the maid of honor responsibilities. Won't that be nice? Her voice had taken on that bright, artificial tone she used when she was trying to convince someone that something terrible was actually good for them. I had heard her use it on waiters she was about to stiff, on assistants she was about to fire, on friends she was about to abandon. I had never heard her use it on me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how that moment shattered something fundamental inside me, you need to understand what Clara and I had been to each other for the previous 26 years. We weren't just twins, we were each other's entire world for most of our childhood. When we were born, Clara came first, screaming and demanding attention from the very beginning. I came second, silent and still, and the doctors weren't sure I was going to make it. I was born with a rare condition that damaged my optic nerves, leaving me completely blind from birth. Clara used to joke that I had given her all my sight so she could be beautiful enough for both of us. I used to think it was sweet. Now I realize it was probably the truest thing she ever said to me. Our parents, Richard and Victoria Monroe, handled having a disabled child exactly the way you'd expect from a family whose main concerns were social standing and public image. They threw money at the problem. Private tutors, expensive schools, the best specialists money could buy. But what they couldn't buy was comfort with the fact that one of their daughters would never fit the perfect family portrait they wanted to present to their social circle. Clara became their shining star, and I became their secret shame. Not openly, never where anyone could see, but in the small ways that cut deepest. Clara got writing lessons and tennis lessons and dance classes. I got orientation and mobility training. Clara's achievements were celebrated with dinner parties and announcements in the society pages. Mine were acknowledged with a pat on the head and suggestions that I not mention them to their friends. The thing about being twins is that you don't just share a birthday, you share a perspective on everything that shaped you. Clara and I lived through the same childhood, but we experienced completely different versions of it. She learned that her value came from how she looked and how she made others feel about themselves. I learned that my value came from how invisible I could make myself and how little trouble I could cause. And somewhere along the way, we both became exactly what our parents trained us to be. Clara was 22 when she had her first real heartbreak. Some investment banker named Trevor who had been taking her to all the right parties and introducing her to all the right people. She thought he was going to propose, had already started planning the wedding in her head, when she found out he was actually engaged to someone else, had been the entire time they were together. She called me at 2 in the morning, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. I took a taxi to her apartment in the middle of a thunderstorm and spent the next 3 days helping her piece herself back together. I made her soup, let her cry on my shoulder, and listened to her rage about how men only wanted her for how she looked, how no one ever bothered to get to know the real her. "You're the only person who really knows me, Celine," she said on the third night, her voice raw from crying. "You're the only person who's ever loved me for who I am instead of what I look like." I held her hand and told her that someone worthy of her would come along, someone who would see her heart the way I did. I meant every word. When she met August 6 months later, I was the first person she called. She was breathless with excitement, talking a mile a minute about this incredible man she'd met at a charity auction. Rich, handsome, successful, and best of all, he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. "He doesn't just stare at me, Celine," she said. "He actually listens when I talk. He asks about my work, about my opinions on things. I think this might be it. I think this might be the one." I was so happy for her. After watching her go through a string of relationships with men who treated her like an accessory, hearing the genuine joy in her voice made my heart sing. She deserved someone who saw her as more than just a beautiful face. What I didn't know then was that August did see her as more than just a beautiful face. He saw her as a beautiful face with access to our family's money and social connections. The Monroe family fortune wasn't old money, but it was substantial money. Our grandfather had built a small empire importing luxury goods, and our father had expanded it into real estate and investments. We weren't billionaires, but we were the kind of wealthy where money was never a concern and doors opened because of our last name. August's family had the name and the reputation, but their actual liquid assets were less impressive than they appeared. The Whitfield real estate empire looked magnificent from the outside, but it was leveraged to the point of being basically a house of cards. August needed an investor, and Clara needed someone to love her. It was a perfect match, as long as you didn't look too closely at the motivations involved. I started noticing things about 6 months into their relationship. Little things that didn't quite add up. August would ask Clara about family business in ways that seemed a little too interested. He'd steer conversations toward our father's investments, our mother's charity connections, our family's relationship with various business leaders around the city. When I mentioned this to Clara, she laughed it off. "He's just trying to understand my world, Celine." That's what people do when they're falling in love. They want to know everything about each other. She was so happy that I didn't push it. Clara had spent most of her life being valued for superficial reasons, and she was finally with someone who seemed to want to know her deeply. Who was I to inject doubt into that? The engagement happened on our 25th birthday. August had planned this elaborate party at the country club, supposedly to celebrate both of us, but really to celebrate Clara. I was there, of course, playing the role I had perfected over the years, supportive sister, gracious guest, invisible presence who made sure Clara had everything she needed. When August dropped to one knee in front of 300 people, Clara's scream of joy could probably be heard in the parking lot. She said yes before he even finished asking the question, and the crowd erupted in applause. I clapped along with everyone else, genuinely happy for her, even though something in my chest felt tight and sad in a way I couldn't quite name. Later that night, after the party had ended and most of the guests had gone home, Clara found me sitting alone on the country club's terrace. I was listening to the sounds of the cleanup crew packing up the chairs and tables, trying to process the strange mixture of joy and loneliness that had been sitting in my stomach all evening. "Celine," she said, sitting down beside me. "I need to ask you something important." I turned toward her voice. Of course. Anything. Will you be my maid of honor? The question should have filled me with pure happiness. Instead, that tight feeling in my chest got a little tighter. Not because I didn't want to do it, but because of the way she asked. Like she was doing me a favor instead of asking for one. Clara, you don't even need to ask. Of course I will. She hugged me then, and I smelled champagne and expensive perfume and hairspray from the elaborate updo she'd worn for the party. I'm so happy, she whispered. Everything is finally falling into place. And I held her and told her how happy I was for her, and I meant it. Even though I couldn't shake the feeling that something important was shifting between us, something that would never quite be the same again. The wedding planning took over Clara's life completely. Every conversation became about flowers or dresses or guest lists or venue details. I threw myself into helping her with everything, partly because I wanted to be supportive and partly because it felt like the only way to stay connected to her. August was taking up more and more of her time and attention, and when she wasn't with him, she was thinking about him. I didn't mind, really. Clara had always been the center of attention wherever she went, and I had always been content to orbit around her brightness. But there was something different about the way she talked to me during those 18 months of planning. More distant, more distracted, like I was an employee helping her execute a vision rather than her sister sharing in her joy. The dress shopping was when I first really understood how the dynamic between us had shifted. Clara had made appointments at 3 different boutiques, each more exclusive than the last. I went with her to all of them, offering opinions when asked, helping her navigate the logistics of trying on dozens of dresses. At the 3rd boutique, she found the one a stunning creation that cost more than most people make in a year. When she came out of the dressing room wearing it, I heard the collective sigh from every person in the store. Even I could hear the difference in how the fabric moved, could sense the way it seemed to transform her into something ethereal. "What do you think, Celine?" she asked, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You sound radiant," I said. "I can hear it in your voice. This is the dress." "I feel like a princess," she said. "August is going to die when he sees me in this." The saleswoman, who had been fawning over Clara for the past hour, suddenly seemed to remember I was there. "And for the maid of honor," she said, "we have some lovely options that would complement this beautifully." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Actually," Clara said, "we're going to handle the bridesmaid dresses separately. Something a little more budget-friendly. Budget-friendly. For a wedding that was costing more than most people's houses." I didn't say anything. I smiled and nodded and told her that sounded like a great plan. But something shifted in my understanding of where I stood in her priorities. The wedding dress was an investment in her future with August. The bridesmaid dresses were an expense to be minimized. That night, lying in bed in my childhood room, I tried to tell myself I was being too sensitive. Clara was under a lot of stress, dealing with a lot of pressure from August's family and our parents about making everything perfect. It was natural that some things would get less attention than others. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was becoming one of those things getting less attention. The final dress fitting for the bridesmaids happened 2 weeks before the wedding. Clara had chosen something simple and elegant in a soft blue that she said would look beautiful in photos. When I went to try it on, the dress fit perfectly, and the seamstress made only minor adjustments. "All set," she said cheerfully. "You're going to look beautiful walking down that aisle." I smiled and thanked her, genuinely excited to be part of Clara's special day. I had no idea that even as I was being fitted for the dress, Clara was already making plans to replace me. The week before the wedding, August's sister Jessica arrived from London. I met her exactly once, at the rehearsal dinner, and she seemed pleasant enough. Polite, well-dressed, the kind of person who fit seamlessly into the world Clara and August were building together. What I didn't know was that Jessica had been asking questions about me. Questions about my blindness, about how it would affect the photographs, about whether I would be able to navigate the ceremony without causing problems. What I didn't know was that August had been having conversations with Clara about the optics of having a disabled person prominently featured in their wedding photos. Photos that would be appearing in several high-profile magazines and social media accounts. What I didn't know was that my own sister was agreeing with him. So when Clara knocked on my door that morning, with her artificial brightness and her talk of adjustments and family politics, I was completely unprepared for what was actually happening. She wasn't making a difficult but necessary decision about wedding logistics. She was choosing between her image and her sister. And she was choosing her image. The word adjustments was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that conversation, and we both knew it. I stood there in my bedroom, still holding the door handle, trying to process what Clara was actually telling me. She wanted me to step down as her maid of honor. Not because of scheduling conflicts or family emergencies or any of the legitimate reasons people sometimes have to change wedding plans at the last minute. She wanted me to step down because having a blind sister in her wedding photos might make them less perfect. Clara, I said slowly, help me understand this. You're telling me that after 18 months of planning, after having my dress fitted, after going through every detail of this wedding together, you want me to sit in the audience because August's sister showed up unexpectedly. It's not that simple, Celine. You know how these things work. There are family dynamics at play here that are bigger than just what you and I want. What I want. The words came out sharper than I intended. Clara, this isn't about what I want. This is about you honoring a commitment you made to me a year and a half ago. I heard her move away from the window, probably pacing the way she always did when she felt cornered. Look, I know this is disappointing, but you have to understand the position I'm in. August's family is already skeptical about some things, and his mother has very specific ideas about how this wedding should look. If I push back on every little thing, it's going to cause problems that affect more than just one day. Some things, I repeated. What kinds of things are they skeptical about, Clara? The silence stretched between us for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, more careful. They just want to make sure everything goes smoothly. That there aren't any complications. And there it was. The word she couldn't quite bring herself to say directly, but the meaning was crystal clear. I was the complication. My blindness was the thing that might not look right in the photos, might cause awkward moments, might draw attention away from the perfect image they were trying to create. I see, I said, which was probably poor word choice given the circumstances, but Clara didn't seem to notice the irony. And you agree with them? You think I would cause complications? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said, Clara. You just used nicer words to say it. I heard her sigh, and when she spoke again, there was an edge of frustration in her voice that I recognized. It was the same tone she used when she was tired of pretending to be patient about something that was inconveniencing her. Celine, you're being dramatic about this. It's not about you personally, it's about the logistics of the day. Having Jessica in the wedding party just makes more sense from a family perspective. You'll still be there, you'll still be part of everything. Just from a different position. A different position, I repeated. In the audience. With the other guests. Watching my twin sister get married while the woman who replaced me holds her bouquet and stands beside her at the altar. You're making this sound much worse than it actually is. How is it actually then? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're ashamed of me. The words hung in the air between us like a live wire. I hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even fully admitted to myself that's what I was thinking. But once they were out there, I couldn't take them back, and the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. That's not fair, Clara said finally. I have never been ashamed of you. Then explain to me why having me in your wedding party would be a complication. Because. She stopped, started again. Because sometimes there are things that are bigger than what we personally want, Celine. Sometimes we have to make decisions based on what's best for everyone involved, not just what makes us feel good in the moment. What's best for everyone involved, I said. Does that include me? Because this doesn't feel like what's best for me, Clara. This feels like what's easiest for you. I heard her take a sharp breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted into the cold, controlled tone she used when she was done pretending to be nice about something. You know what, Celine? Maybe this is actually a blessing in disguise. Maybe not having to worry about managing all the maid of honor responsibilities will let you actually enjoy the day for once instead of stressing about every little detail. Managing all the maid of honor responsibilities. As if the 18 months I had spent helping her plan every aspect of this wedding had been some kind of burden I was inflicting on myself rather than an expression of love and support. Right, I said. Because being your maid of honor would be such a hardship for me. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, Clara. You meant that having me stand beside you would be a responsibility you'd have to manage rather than a sister you'd want to honor. The conversation was spiraling into territory we'd never been in before. Clara and I had disagreed about things over the years, but we'd never had the kind of fight where we said things designed to hurt each other. We'd never been in a place where the careful politeness that held our relationship together was starting to crack and show what was really underneath. I think you should take some time to calm down, Clara said. We can talk about this later when you're being more rational. When I was being more rational. As if my hurt and anger about being kicked out of her wedding were somehow unreasonable reactions that I needed to get under control. Actually, I said, I think we've talked about this enough. I understand exactly what you're telling me, Clara. You don't want me in your wedding party because you think I'll ruin your perfect pictures. Message received. Celine, that's not. Have a beautiful wedding, I said, and I opened my bedroom door to make it clear the conversation was over. She stood there for a moment, and I could feel her deciding whether to push the argument further or cut her losses. Clara had always been good at calculating the cost of her battles, and apparently this one wasn't worth the price. I hope you'll still come, she said quietly. As a guest. It would mean a lot to me to have you there. It would mean a lot to her to have me there. Sitting in the audience, invisible and unimportant, watching her marry August while Jessica stood in the place that should have been mine. It would mean a lot to her to know that I had absorbed this humiliation gracefully and shown up anyway to smile and applaud at all the right moments. We'll see, I said. She left without saying goodbye, and I closed the door behind her and stood there in my bedroom, still wearing the robe I'd put on to get ready for her wedding, trying to understand what had just happened to my life. The dress I was supposed to wear was hanging in my closet, perfectly altered to fit me, in the soft blue Clara had chosen because she said it would complement her wedding dress beautifully in the photos. Photos I would no longer be in. The shoes I had bought specifically to go with the dress were sitting by my dresser. The jewelry I had planned to wear was laid out on my vanity. Everything was ready for a day that was no longer going to happen, at least not the way I had imagined it for the past 18 months. I sat down on my bed and tried to think about what came next. I could still go to the wedding as a guest, could still show up and smile and pretend that everything was fine, that having my sister replace me with a stranger at the last minute was just one of those things that happen sometimes. I could preserve the peace, maintain the relationship, be the gracious and understanding sister Clara apparently needed me to be. Or I could have some dignity. The choice, when I really looked at it clearly, wasn't actually that difficult. I walked to my closet and pulled out the bridesmaid dress, still in its garment bag, still tagged with the seamstress's notes about the minor alterations she had made. I folded it carefully and put it in the box it had come in, along with the shoes and the jewelry and all the other accessories I had bought for a day that was no longer mine to be part of. Then I got dressed in regular clothes, called a car, and had everything delivered to Clara's bridal suite at the hotel where she was getting ready with Jessica and August's mother and the photographer who would be taking the perfect pictures that didn't include me. I didn't include a note. I didn't need to. Clara would understand what the box meant when it arrived. What I didn't expect was the phone call that came 20 minutes later. What the hell do you think you're doing? Clara's voice was sharp with panic, all pretense of politeness abandoned. I'm returning your bridesmaid dress, I said calmly. since I won't be needing it anymore. Celine, you can't do this. The wedding is in 3 hours. The wedding that I'm no longer in? I'm aware of the timing, Clara. Look, I know you're upset, but we can work this out. You can still be part of the ceremony. Maybe you could do a reading or... I'm not interested in consolation prizes, I said. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. What choice? What are you talking about? I'm choosing not to come to your wedding at all. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard Clara take a shaky breath. You're really going to miss my wedding because you're having a tantrum about not being in the wedding party? A tantrum. That's what she called it when I refused to accept being humiliated quietly. I'm going to miss your wedding because you made it clear that having me there would be a complication you'd rather not deal with. I'm just saving you the trouble. Celine, please. I know I handled this badly, but you can't just abandon me on my wedding day. I need you there. She needed me there. Not wanted, needed. Because having her blind sister visible enough to be supportive, but invisible enough not to interfere with the perfect image, was apparently crucial to her wedding day success. You needed Jessica there more, I said. Enjoy your perfect pictures, Clara. I hung up the phone and turned it off. And for the first time in my 26 years, I chose myself over my sister's convenience. Turning off my phone felt like stepping off a cliff. For 26 years, I had never been unreachable to Clara. Never been unavailable when she needed something, never been the one to walk away from a conflict between us. The silence in my room was deafening, but it was also strangely liberating. I had nowhere to be. No maid of honor duties to fulfill, no wedding timeline to follow, no sister to support through the biggest day of her life. For the first time in 18 months, my Saturday was completely my own. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt terrible about abandoning Clara on her wedding day, about letting my hurt feelings override my loyalty to family. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, the absence of obligation. The absence of the constant, low-level anxiety that came from always being responsible for someone else's emotional well-being. I made myself coffee and sat on my bedroom floor, listening to the sounds of a normal Saturday morning in the Monroe household. My parents were already gone, presumably getting ready for the wedding I would not be attending. The house felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with how many people were in it. My phone stayed off for 3 hours. When I finally turned it back on, I had 27 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from Clara, but several were from my mother, and a few were from numbers I didn't recognize, probably wedding party members or family friends who had heard about the situation. The messages from Clara progressed through what looked like the 5 stages of grief in real time. Anger, bargaining, more anger, desperation, and finally, a cold fury that was probably closer to her real feelings than anything else she had sent. The last message, sent just 15 minutes earlier, was the one that made my stomach drop. Fine. Have it your way. But don't expect the family to forgive you for this. Some things can't be taken back, Celine. Some things can't be taken back. The words felt like a threat and a promise at the same time. My mother's messages were shorter, but somehow more devastating. Your sister is heartbroken. How could you do this to her on her wedding day? This is beneath you, Celine. Heartbroken. Clara was heartbroken that I wasn't there to watch her marry August after she had kicked me out of the wedding party to avoid having a blind sister in her perfect pictures. The logic was so twisted it would have been funny if it wasn't so painful. I was still scrolling through the messages when I heard a car in our driveway. Heavy footsteps on the front porch, the sound of someone using a key to let themselves in. My father's voice calling my name from downstairs. Celine? Are you here? I considered pretending I wasn't home, but that felt like more cowardice than I was prepared for. I'm upstairs, I called back. I heard him coming up the stairs, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Richard Monroe was not a man who did anything without careful consideration, which meant this conversation had been planned, probably discussed with my mother, probably scripted to achieve a specific outcome. He knocked on my door and waited for permission to enter, which was more courtesy than Clara had shown me that morning. "Come in." He sat down in the chair by my window, the one I used when I was getting ready for events that required more elaborate preparation. I stayed on the floor, mostly because standing up felt like giving him some kind of advantage I wasn't ready to concede. "Your mother asked me to come talk to you," he said. "About what?" "About the fact that you're not at your sister's wedding." I had been expecting anger, disappointment, the kind of lecture I had received throughout my childhood about family loyalty and doing the right thing even when it was difficult. Instead, his voice was curious, almost neutral. "Clara told you what happened?" I asked. "She told me her version of what happened." "I'd like to hear yours." That was unexpected. In most family conflicts, my parents had a tendency to assume Clara's perspective was the correct one and work backward from there. Having my father actually ask for my side of the story felt like stepping into some kind of alternate universe. I told him everything. The conversation that morning, the way Clara had presented kicking me out of the wedding party as if she was doing me a favor, the phone call afterward where she'd called my hurt feelings a tantrum. I tried to keep my voice level and factual, but by the end, I could hear the pain bleeding through anyway. My father listened without interrupting, which was also unusual for him. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "That must have been very hurtful," he said finally. The simple acknowledgement hit me harder than I was prepared for. I had expected him to tell me I was overreacting, that I needed to put family first, that Clara was under stress, and I should be more understanding. I had not expected him to validate my feelings. "It was," I said. "Your sister has always struggled with managing competing priorities," he said carefully. "She wants to be loved and accepted, but she also wants to be perfect. Sometimes those desires conflict with each other. So she chose being perfect over being loyal. She chose what felt safest to her in the moment. That doesn't make it right, but it might help you understand why she made the choice she did." I looked toward him, wishing I could see his expression. "Are you defending her?" "I'm trying to help you both figure out how to move forward from this. Clara made a mistake, but you've made choices too. The question is whether this is the hill you want your relationship to die on." The hill I wanted our relationship to die on. As if the problem was my unwillingness to forgive rather than her willingness to betray. "Dad, she kicked me out of her wedding party because she was ashamed of how I would look in her pictures. How exactly am I supposed to move forward from that?" "By remembering that your sister loves you, even when she makes terrible decisions. And by deciding whether you love her enough to forgive the terrible decision." He made it sound so simple. Forgive and forget, choose love over hurt, be the bigger person. The same advice I had been getting my entire life whenever Clara did something that wounded me and I was expected to absorb the damage gracefully. "What if I'm tired of always being the one who forgives?" I asked. "Then you'll find out what it feels like to be right and alone at the same time." He left me with that thought, which was probably the point. Right and alone. The implication being that staying angry with Clara would cost me my family, my place in the Monroe legacy, my connection to the only people who had ever known me as anything other than a tragic figure to be pitied or inspired by. But the thing about being alone is that sometimes it's better than being surrounded by people who only want you around when you're convenient. I spent the rest of the day in my room, listening to classical music and trying not to think about what was happening at St. Augustine Cathedral. Clara's ceremony was supposed to start at 4 o'clock. By 5, she would be married to August, surrounded by 350 guests who were celebrating her perfect day. By 6, they would be at the reception, dancing and toasting and creating memories that I would never be part of. By 7, I would be officially the sister who had chosen her pride over her family. Except that around 7:30, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Celine Monroe?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is Dr. Patricia Mills's office. I'm calling because we've had a cancellation in our schedule tomorrow, and Dr. Mills wanted to know if you'd be available to come in for your appointment. Dr. Mills was the orientation and mobility specialist I had been working with for the past 2 years, helping me develop the skills I needed to navigate the world more independently. I had been on a waiting list for months to get additional training, specifically around using technology and transportation systems that would let me be more self-sufficient. I thought my appointment wasn't until next month, I said. It wasn't, but we had a last-minute opening, and Dr. Mills thought you might want to take advantage of it. She mentioned that you'd expressed interest in some of the more advanced independence training programs. Independence training. The conversation felt like a sign from the universe, or at least like a cosmic joke about timing. On the day I had chosen to prioritize my own dignity over family harmony, someone was offering me tools to be more independent. What time tomorrow? I asked. 10 a.m. And I should mention, there's someone else who'll be joining the session tomorrow. Another client who's been working on similar goals. Dr. Mills thought you two might benefit from working together on some of the exercises. I almost said no. Working with another client meant dealing with a stranger, meant being vulnerable about my limitations in front of someone I didn't know. But something about the day had left me feeling like I needed to try new things, needed to stop always choosing the safe and familiar path. Okay, I said. I'll be there. Excellent. Oh, and Celine? Dr. Mills wanted me to tell you that she's really proud of the progress you've been making. She thinks you're ready for some challenges that are going to surprise you. Challenges that were going to surprise me. I hung up the phone and wondered if Dr. Mills had any idea how ready I was for my life to surprise me. That night, I lay in bed listening to the sounds of my parents coming home from Clara's wedding. I heard their car in the driveway, heard them talking in low voices as they came into the house. My mother's heels clicking on the marble floor of the foyer, my father's deeper voice responding to something she had said. They didn't come upstairs to check on me, which told me everything I needed to know about how the rest of the family was processing my absence from the wedding. I was being given the silent treatment, the cold shoulder that was supposed to make me realize my mistake and come crawling back with apologies. Instead, it made me realize how much of my life had been spent apologizing for choices that were actually reasonable responses to unreasonable situations. I fell asleep thinking about independence training and wondering what kinds of challenges Dr. Mills thought I was ready for. I had no idea that the biggest challenge of my life was about to walk into that appointment with me. What I also didn't know was that while I was lying in my childhood bed feeling sorry for myself, Clara's perfect wedding was falling apart in ways that had nothing to do with my absence. August had spent the reception getting progressively drunker and more careless about hiding his true feelings about various aspects of his new wife's family. By the time the dancing started, he was making comments about the charity case sister who couldn't even be bothered to show up, and suggesting that maybe my absence was actually a blessing since nobody wants to deal with that kind of drama. In their wedding photos, several guests heard him. Several guests who had known our family for years and were shocked by the casual cruelty of his remarks. Word spread through the reception like wildfire, and by the end of the night, Clara was dealing with the humiliating realization that her new husband's true character was becoming apparent to everyone she cared about impressing. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that I had chosen myself over my sister's convenience, and tomorrow I was going to find out what independence actually looked like. I was also going to meet the man who would change everything I thought I knew about my own worth. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my mother's voice outside my bedroom door, sharp and cold in a way that made my stomach clench before I was even fully awake. Celine, we need to talk. Now. I checked my phone 8:30 a.m. I had 2 hours before my appointment with Dr. Mills, which meant whatever conversation my mother wanted to have was going to set the tone for what was already shaping up to be a complicated day. Come in, I called, sitting up in bed and trying to prepare myself for whatever version of disappointed parent I was about to encounter. She didn't sit down. I could hear her standing just inside my doorway, and the energy coming off her felt like barely contained fury. "I just got off the phone with your sister," she said. "She's devastated, Celine. Absolutely devastated." "About what now?" I asked, which was probably not the most diplomatic response, but I was tired of tiptoeing around Clara's feelings when no one seemed particularly concerned about mine. About the fact that her own twin sister couldn't be bothered to show up to her wedding. About having to explain to 350 guests why you weren't there. About starting her marriage with this kind of family drama hanging over everything. Family drama. As if I had created the drama rather than simply refused to participate in my own humiliation. "Mom, did Clara tell you why I didn't come to the wedding? She told me you had a disagreement about the wedding party arrangements, and you decided to throw a tantrum instead of working it out like an adult." A tantrum. The same word Clara had used. I was starting to see how this story was being told to the rest of the family. Did she mention that she kicked me out of the wedding party the morning of the wedding? After 18 months of planning? Because August's family thought having a blind bridesmaid would complicate their perfect photos. The silence that followed was long enough that I wondered if my mother was processing this information for the first time. When she finally spoke, her voice was more measured but no less cold. Clara explained the situation with Jessica. "These things happen, Celine. Wedding logistics are complicated, and sometimes adjustments have to be made. That's not a reason to abandon your sister on the most important day of her life. These things happen. Wedding logistics are complicated." My mother was minimizing what Clara had done to me the same way Clara had, using the same language of inevitability and practicality to make my hurt feelings seem unreasonable. "So you think what she did was acceptable?" "I think what she did was make a difficult decision under pressure, and what you did was make it worse by being selfish and dramatic." Selfish and dramatic. For refusing to smile and applaud while watching my sister marry the man who had convinced her I would be a complication at their wedding. "Mom, what exactly do you think I should have done? Shown up and sat in the audience and pretended to be happy after being humiliated like that? I think you should have remembered that sometimes being part of a family means putting other people's needs ahead of your own feelings. I think you should have been there for your sister regardless of your personal disappointments. Other people's needs ahead of my own feelings." That phrase had been the governing principle of my entire relationship with my family, and I was suddenly exhausted by how automatically it rolled off her tongue. What about Clara putting my needs ahead of her image concerns? Does that work both ways, or is it just me who's supposed to sacrifice for everyone else's convenience? You're being ridiculous, Celine. Clara has always been incredibly considerate of your limitations. My limitations. Not my needs, not my feelings, not my dignity. My limitations. Right, I said. So considerate that she kicked me out of her wedding to avoid those limitations interfering with her perfect pictures. That's not what happened, and you know it. That's exactly what happened, Mom. And the fact that you're defending it tells me everything I need to know about where I stand in this family. I heard her take a sharp breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted into the tone she used when she was done pretending to be patient. Fine, Celine. If that's how you want to see it. But I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your choices. Your father and I have been discussing this situation, and we've decided that if you're going to act like you're not part of this family, perhaps you should consider whether you want to continue living in this house. The words hit me like a physical blow. My parents were threatening to kick me out because I hadn't attended Clara's wedding after she humiliated me. You're evicting me because I didn't go to Clara's wedding? We're suggesting that someone who can't maintain basic family relationships might be happier living independently. You've been talking about wanting more autonomy anyway. This seems like the perfect opportunity to pursue that. The perfect opportunity. They were framing throwing me out of my childhood home as if they were doing me a favor. Where exactly do you think I should go, Mom? I don't have a job that pays enough to support independent living. I don't have the kind of trust fund or family support that would make that feasible. You'll figure it out. You're always telling us how capable and independent you are. Time to prove it. She left me sitting there, trying to process the fact that my entire family had apparently decided I was the problem in this situation. Not Clara, who had betrayed her own sister to preserve her image. Not August, who had convinced his new wife that her disabled sister was too much of a liability to include in their perfect day. Me, for refusing to absorb that betrayal gracefully. I had 2 hours to get ready for my appointment with Dr. Mills, and suddenly that independence training felt less like an opportunity and more like a necessity. The ride to Dr. Mills's office was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I sat in the back of the rideshare, listening to the driver make awkward small talk about the weather, trying not to think about the fact that I might be homeless within the week. My phone had been buzzing with messages from Clara all morning, but I hadn't read them. I wasn't ready to hear more about how my choices were devastating her when her choices had devastated me first. Dr. Mills's office was in a building downtown that I had been to several times before, but today everything felt different. More uncertain, more loaded with consequences I wasn't prepared for. Celine. Dr. Mills's voice was warm and familiar as I walked into the reception area. I'm so glad you could make it today. I think you're going to really enjoy this session. I hope so, I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. I could use some good news today. Well, before we get started, I want you to meet someone. Ethan, this is Celine Monroe, the client I was telling you about. Celine, this is Ethan Cross. I heard a chair creak as someone stood up, and then footsteps crossing the room toward me. When he spoke, his voice was deeper than I had expected, with a slight roughness that suggested either recent illness or natural gravel. Celine, it's a pleasure to meet you. Patricia has told me incredible things about your progress. I extended my hand for what I expected to be a polite, professional handshake. What I got instead was a moment of contact that felt like an electric shock running up my arm. His hand was warm and calloused in a way that suggested actual work rather than gym sessions, and he held mine just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Nice to meet you, Ethan, I managed. Are you working on mobility training too? Something like that, he said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. Though I suspect I'm going to learn more from watching you than the other way around. Dr. Mills clapped her hands together. Excellent. Now I have to step out for about 15 minutes to handle another appointment, but I thought you two could get acquainted and maybe Ethan could observe while Celine runs through some of the route navigation exercises we've been working on. Actually, Ethan said, I was hoping I could ask Celine a question first, if that's okay. Of course, Dr. Mills said. I'll be back shortly. I heard her leave the room, and suddenly I was alone with this stranger who had somehow made my entire nervous system light up with a handshake. So, Ethan said, and I heard him sit back down. Patricia mentioned that you've been dealing with some family challenges lately. Anything you want to talk about? The question was so unexpected and so direct that I almost laughed. Did she really say that, or are you just exceptionally good at reading people? Little bit of both, he said. You looked like someone who's had a rough couple of days when you walked in here. I considered deflecting, giving him some polite non-answer that would keep our interactions safely professional. Instead, something about his voice made me want to tell the truth. My twin sister got married yesterday, I said. I didn't go. By choice or by circumstance? Choice. After she kicked me out of the wedding party the morning of the ceremony because she was worried about how having a blind bridesmaid would look in the photos. The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable silences I had been getting from my family. This felt like someone actually processing what I had told him, actually considering the weight of it. That must have been incredibly painful, he said finally. It was. And now my parents are threatening to kick me out of the house because they think I was being selfish and dramatic for not going anyway. Jesus, he said quietly. Your family sounds like they have some seriously screwed up priorities. The blunt assessment was so different from all the careful diplomatic language everyone else had been using that it actually made me laugh. That's certainly one way to put it. Can I ask you something else? He said. Sure. What's your sister's new last name? The question was so random that it took me a moment to answer. Whitfield. Clara Whitfield now, I guess. Why? The silence that followed was so complete and so long that I started to wonder if he had left the room without me noticing. Ethan? Are you still there? I'm here, he said, and his voice had changed in a way I couldn't quite identify. Celine, what's your sister's husband's first name? August. August Whitfield. Do you know him? Another long pause. When he spoke again, there was something in his voice that made my skin prickle. You could say that. August Whitfield owes me about $12 million. The room felt like it tilted sideways. What? His company has been hemorrhaging money for the past 2 years. I've been funding their operations through a series of loans that were supposed to be paid back within 6 months. August has been stalling on repayment for almost a year now, coming up with excuse after excuse about why he needs more time. I sat there trying to process this information. Are you saying August is in debt to you? I'm saying August is about to lose everything he owns if he doesn't come up with my money in the next 30 days. And based on what I know about his financial situation, the only way he's going to be able to do that is if he gets access to some serious family money very quickly. Family money. Like the Monroe family money that Clara now had access to as August's wife. Oh my God, I whispered. He married her for our money. I don't know what his motivations were for the marriage, Ethan said carefully. But I do know that his company is hanging by a thread, and he's been increasingly desperate about finding new sources of funding. The conversation from that morning suddenly made horrible sense. Clara calling me selfish and dramatic for not going to the wedding. My parents threatening to kick me out for embarrassing the family. Everyone rallying around Clara and August's perfect image while treating me like the problem. They needed the marriage to work. They needed Clara to be happy and settled and completely committed to August, because if she started having doubts about him, if she started asking questions about his finances or his motivations, the whole house of cards might come tumbling down. And my presence at the wedding, my obvious hurt and anger about being kicked out of the wedding party, might have raised exactly those kinds of questions. Celine. Ethan's voice was gentle. Are you okay? I said slowly, I think my family just sold me out to protect a con man. I'm sorry, he said, and he sounded like he actually meant it. That's got to be a devastating realization. Devastating didn't begin to cover it. Everything I had believed about my family's motivations, everything I had told myself about Clara's decision to kick me out of the wedding, everything I had accepted about my place in the Monroe family hierarchy, all of it was built on a lie. They hadn't chosen Clara over me because she was their golden child and I was their obligation. They had chosen August's money over my dignity because they needed him to stay happy and married and financially connected to our family. I wasn't the daughter they were ashamed of. I was the daughter they were willing to sacrifice to keep their golden goose laying eggs. Ethan, I said, what exactly do you do for a living? I invest in companies, he said. And when they don't pay me back, I take them over. Are you going to take over August's company? Unless he comes up with $12 million in the next 30 days? Absolutely. I sat there in Dr. Mills's office, listening to the traffic outside and trying to understand how completely my life had just changed. 12 hours ago, I thought I was dealing with a sister who had been influenced by her new husband's shallow priorities. Now I was learning that my entire family had conspired to protect a man who was stealing from one of the most powerful investors in the city. Celine, Ethan said quietly, can I make a suggestion? I'm listening. Maybe it's time you stopped letting your family tell you what you're worth. The words hit me like a lightning bolt, cutting straight through all the confusion and pain and uncertainty to something solid and true underneath. Maybe it was time I stopped letting anyone tell me what I was worth. Dr. Mills is going to be back soon, I said. Should we probably focus on the mobility training? Actually, Ethan said, I have a different kind of training in mind. How would you feel about learning how to take back control of your life? Learning how to take back control of my life sounded like exactly what I needed, but first I had to survive losing everything I thought I had left. Dr. Mills returned before Ethan could explain what he meant about a different kind of training, and the rest of the appointment proceeded normally. I ran through navigation exercises, practiced using new technology, and tried to focus on the tasks at hand instead of the revelation that my sister had married a man who was essentially stealing from one of the most powerful investors in the city. But I kept thinking about what Ethan had said about August owing him $12 million and about the timeline involved. August had needed money, and he had needed it quickly. Clara represented access to the Monroe family fortune. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of their love, it was a business transaction designed to solve August's financial problems. And I had been the potential complication that could have derailed the whole plan. When the appointment ended, Ethan walked out with me, and we stood on the sidewalk outside Dr. Mills's building while I waited for my rideshare. "Celine," he said, "I know today has been overwhelming, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this situation. What your family did to you isn't okay, and what August is doing to your family isn't legal." "What do you mean, not legal?" "I mean that taking money from investors under false pretenses is fraud. And if he's been using Monroe family money to pay off other debts while avoiding his obligations to me, that could constitute several different kinds of financial crimes." The implications of what he was saying started sinking in. "Are you telling me that my family's money might be at risk?" "I'm telling you that your brother-in-law is the kind of man who borrows $12 million and then spends a year coming up with creative excuses for why he can't pay it back. People like that don't usually limit their creative accounting to one area of their lives." My phone buzzed with a text from my rideshare driver saying he was around the corner. I had about 2 minutes to decide whether I wanted to ask Ethan the question that was forming in my mind. "When you said you had a different kind of training in mind," I said, "what exactly did you mean?" "I meant that you have information about August that could be very valuable to me, and you have every reason to want justice for what he's put you through. Maybe we could help each other." "Help each other how?" "Have dinner with me tonight, and I'll explain. Somewhere public, somewhere you feel safe. Just two people talking about a situation that affects both of us." My car pulled up to the curb, and I heard the driver's window roll down. "Celine." "That's me," I called back. Then, to Ethan, "Okay. Dinner. But I choose the restaurant." "Absolutely. Here's my number. Text me the address, and I'll meet you there." I felt him press a business card into my hand, and then he was helping me into the car and giving the driver my address. As we pulled away from the curb, I ran my fingers over the embossed text on his card. Cross Investment Group. Ethan Cross, CEO. The man my sister's husband owed $12 million wasn't just some random investor. He was the CEO of one of the largest private investment firms in the city. And he wanted to have dinner with me to discuss how we could help each other. The ride home gave me 30 minutes to think about what that might mean, but I was still processing when we pulled into my family's driveway. The house looked the same as always from the outside, but when I walked through the front door, I could immediately sense that something had changed. My mother was waiting for me in the foyer, and she wasn't alone. I could hear at least 2 other voices coming from the living room, Clara's voice, sharp and upset, and August's voice, lower but clearly agitated. "Celine," my mother said, "we need to talk. All of us." This felt like an ambush, but there was nowhere to run, and honestly, I was too tired to try. "Fine. Let's talk." I followed her into the living room, where Clara and August were sitting on the couch that faced the doorway. My father was in his usual chair by the window. The arrangement felt very much like a tribunal, with me as the defendant facing a panel of judges who had already decided on my guilt. "Sit down," my father said, indicating the chair across from the couch. I sat and immediately regretted it. The position put me at a disadvantage, facing all of them while they could study my reactions and coordinate their responses. "Clara has something she wants to say to you," my mother announced. I turned toward Clara's voice, waiting. When she spoke, she sounded like she had been crying, but there was an edge of anger underneath the tears. "Celine, I know you're angry with me, but what you did yesterday was unforgivable." You humiliated me in front of everyone I care about. You made my wedding day about your hurt feelings instead of celebrating the most important moment of my life. The most important moment of her life. I wondered if she knew that the most important moment of her life had been a business transaction designed to give August access to our family's money. I made your wedding day about my hurt feelings? I said. Clara, you kicked me out of your wedding party the morning of the ceremony. What exactly was I supposed to do with those hurt feelings? You were supposed to be an adult about it, August said, speaking for the first time. You were supposed to understand that weddings are complicated and sometimes plans have to change. August Whitfield, who owed $12 million to the man I was having dinner with tonight, was lecturing me about being an adult. Plans have to change, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you decide having a blind sister in the wedding photos might damage your image? That's not what happened, Clara said quickly. That's not what this was about at all. Then what was it about, Clara? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you chose your husband's opinion over your sister's dignity. She chose her future over your need for attention, August said coldly. Not everything is about you, Celine. The casual cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was the man my family was protecting, the man they had sacrificed me to appease. You're right, I said. Not everything is about me. Some things are about $12 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Then August's voice, very carefully controlled. What did you say? I said some things are about $12 million. That's how much money you owe Ethan Cross, isn't it? That's why you needed to marry into the Monroe family so quickly. That's why having a disabled sister-in-law in your wedding photos was such a problem, because you couldn't afford any complications that might make Clara start asking questions about your motivations. Celine, my father said sharply, where did you get that information? From Ethan Cross. We met today. Lovely man. Very interested in getting his money back. August stood up so quickly I heard the couch creak. You had no right to discuss my business with anyone, especially not with him. Your business. I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to me. August, you made it my business when you convinced my sister to kick me out of her wedding to protect your image. You made it my business when you turned my entire family against me to cover up the fact that you're basically a con man. That's enough, my mother said. Celine, you're clearly upset, and you're saying things you don't understand. I understand perfectly. August needed money, Clara represented access to our family's assets, and I was the inconvenient sister who might have raised uncomfortable questions about his real motivations. So you all decided I was the problem that needed to be managed. That's not true, Clara said, but her voice was shaking. August loves me. He didn't marry me for money. Clara, I said gently, when did August first tell you he loved you? What kind of question is that? Just answer it. When did he first say he loved you? I don't see how that's relevant. Was it before or after he found out about Dad's investment portfolio? Was it before or after he learned about the family trust fund? Was it before or after he figured out how much money the Monroe name could give him access to? Stop it, August said. You don't know what you're talking about. I know you owe $12 million to a man who has the power to destroy your company. I know your financial situation is desperate enough that you've been making excuses for almost a year about why you can't pay him back. And I know that marrying Clara gave you access to exactly the kind of family money you need to solve that problem. Clara made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. That's not true. Tell her that's not true, August. August sat back down heavily, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Flatter, more resigned. The Ethan Cross situation is complicated, Clara. But it doesn't have anything to do with how I feel about you. The Ethan Cross situation, I repeated. That's what you call owing someone $12 million? Celine, that's enough, my father said. This is between August and Clara now. No, it's not, I said. Because you all decided to sacrifice me to protect this marriage. You all decided that my dignity was an acceptable price to pay to keep August happy and quiet about his financial problems. So this involves me too. Nobody sacrificed you, my mother said. You made your own choices. I made my choices after Clara kicked me out of her wedding party to appease her con-man husband. After you all decided that protecting his image was more important than my feelings. After you threatened to kick me out of my childhood home for refusing to smile and applaud while being humiliated. You're being dramatic, August said dismissively. Am I? Because this morning my mother told me that if I can't maintain basic family relationships, maybe I should consider whether I want to continue living in this house. That sounds like being kicked out to me. My father cleared his throat. Celine, we've been thinking about your living situation, and we believe it might be time for you to pursue some of that independence you're always talking about. There it was. The final blow. They weren't just choosing August over me, they were removing me from the equation entirely. You're kicking me out, I said. We're encouraging you to become self-sufficient, my mother corrected. You'll always be our daughter, but you need to learn to support yourself without relying on family resources. Family resources that were apparently going to be needed to bail August out of his financial crimes. When? I asked. We think 30 days would be reasonable, my father said. That gives you time to find suitable accommodations and make the necessary arrangements. 30 days. The same timeline Ethan had mentioned for August to pay back his debt. I see, I said. And if I refuse to leave? Then we'll have to pursue other options, my mother said. This house belongs to your father and me, Celine. We have the right to decide who lives here. Other options. Legal eviction proceedings. Being forcibly removed from my childhood home by sheriff's deputies. Celine, Clara said quietly, it doesn't have to be like this. You could apologize for yesterday, you could try to be supportive of my marriage, and we could work things out. Work things out, I repeated. You mean I could pretend that everything is fine, stop asking inconvenient questions about August's finances, and go back to being the convenient sister who doesn't cause problems? I mean you could try being part of this family instead of attacking it. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the circular logic of people who had decided I was the villain in a story where they were protecting a criminal. You know what, Clara? You're right. This doesn't have to be like this. But it's going to be like this anyway, because I'm done pretending that what you did to me was acceptable. I'm done pretending that August is a good person who loves you for the right reasons. And I'm done pretending that this family cares about anything other than money and image. Where are you going? My mother asked as I headed toward the door. To dinner, I said. With Ethan Cross. To discuss how we can help each other. The last thing I heard as I left the room was August's voice, low and urgent. We need to call our lawyer. I went upstairs to my room and started packing. I had 30 days to figure out how to live independently, but I wasn't going to spend them in a house where I was being treated like a threat to be managed. I had lost my sister, my family, and my home in the space of 24 hours. But I had gained something too. I had gained clarity about who I actually was versus who they needed me to be. And I had gained an ally who might be able to help me do something about the man who had orchestrated my downfall. As I folded clothes into a suitcase, I thought about what Ethan had said about taking back control of my life. I was about to find out what that looked like. I was also about to find out what August Whitfield looked like when he was cornered by someone who refused to be his victim. The restaurant I chose for dinner with Ethan was a small Italian place about 20 minutes from my house, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone from my family's social circle, close enough that I could get there easily on my own. I had been there dozens of times over the years, and the staff knew me well enough that I felt safe meeting a relative stranger there. I arrived first, which was intentional. I wanted to be settled and comfortable before Ethan showed up, wanted to have the advantage of familiar territory when we had whatever conversation was about to change everything I thought I knew about my options. When he walked in, I heard the hostess greet him warmly, which surprised me until I realized he must have introduced himself when he made the reservation. A minute later, I heard his voice approaching my table. Celine? Thank you for meeting me. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of asking about wine pairings when I called to confirm our reservation. You called ahead? I wanted to make sure they could accommodate any accessibility needs you might have, and I wanted to be certain we'd have a quiet table where we could talk privately. The thoughtfulness of that gesture hit me harder than it should have. When was the last time someone had anticipated my needs without making a big show of how considerate they were being? When was the last time someone had planned around my comfort rather than expecting me to adapt to their convenience? That was very thoughtful, I said. It was basic courtesy, he replied, and I heard him sit down across from me. Though I'm getting the impression that basic courtesy might be in short supply in your life lately. The server came by to explain the evening specials and take our drink orders. Ethan asked intelligent questions about the wine list and ended up ordering something that the server clearly approved of. When they left us alone, I realized I had no idea how to start the conversation we were here to have. So, I said finally, help each other how? Direct. I like that. I could hear the smile in his voice. Let me start with what I know about your situation, and then I'll explain what I'm thinking. He laid it out methodically, like someone accustomed to presenting complex information clearly. August's company, Whitfield Development, had been struggling for 2 years due to a combination of market conditions and poor management decisions. When August approached Cross Investment Group for funding, his business plan had been impressive enough to justify a substantial loan, $12 million over 6 months, with the expectation of full repayment plus interest. The problem, Ethan said, is that August used the money differently than he said he would. Instead of investing in the projects he outlined in his business plan, he used most of it to pay off other debts and fund a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. Including an 18-month engagement and an elaborate wedding, I said. Including that, yes. And now, instead of having revenue-generating projects that could help him repay the loan, he has a mountain of personal debt and a company that's barely solvent. Our wine arrived, and the server went through the ritual of letting Ethan taste and approve it. When we were alone again, I asked the question that had been bothering me since our conversation that afternoon. If you're such a powerful investor, why haven't you just taken legal action against him already? Why let him string you along for almost a year? Because $12 million, while significant, isn't worth destroying my reputation over. The investment community is smaller than people think, and if I get a reputation for being unreasonably aggressive with borrowers who hit rough patches, it could affect my ability to make future deals. But something has changed? Something has changed. This afternoon, I learned that August has been telling people that Cross Investment Group is a silent partner in Whitfield Development. He's been using my company's name and reputation to secure additional funding from other sources, essentially leveraging my credibility to borrow money he has no intention of paying back. The implications of that were staggering. That's fraud. That's multiple kinds of fraud. And it's also the end of my patience with August Whitfield's creative accounting. I took a sip of wine, trying to process everything he was telling me. So, what does this have to do with me? You have something I need, and I have something you need. The question is whether we can find a way to work together that benefits both of us. What do I have that you need? Access to August. Information about his financial situation. Details about how he's been spending the Monroe family money. And most importantly, you have the standing to ask questions and demand answers in ways that I legally cannot. Because I'm family. Because you're family. And because family members have certain rights when it comes to questioning financial decisions that affect shared assets. That was interesting. What kind of rights? The kind that would let you request financial records, demand accounting of how family money has been spent, and potentially file legal challenges if you discover that funds have been misappropriated. I hadn't known that was possible. And what do you have that I need? Resources. Legal support. Financial backing. And the ability to help you build a life that doesn't depend on your family's approval or financial support. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Help me get my money back from August. Help me prove that he's been defrauding multiple investors, and I'll help you establish the kind of independence your family keeps claiming they want you to have. The server returned to take our food orders, and I used the interruption to think about what Ethan was proposing. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at water that was either deep enough to dive into safely or shallow enough to break my neck. What would this partnership actually look like? I asked after the server left. Short term? You help me gather evidence about August's financial crimes. You use your family connections to get information I can't access legally. You help me build a case that will not only get my money back, but also prevent him from victimizing other investors. And long term, you come work for Cross Investment Group. I need someone with your skills and perspective. Someone who understands how to navigate complex family dynamics, someone who can read people and situations in ways that pure financial analysis can't capture. Someone who understands what it's like to be underestimated and can use that as an advantage. My skills and perspective. It had been so long since someone had talked about me as if I had valuable professional qualities that I almost didn't know how to respond. You barely know me, I said. How do you know I have the skills you need? Because you figured out that August was conning your family before anyone else did. Because you had the courage to walk away from your sister's wedding when the alternative was accepting your own humiliation. Because you've been living in a house where you're treated as a liability and you've still managed to maintain your dignity and intelligence. Or maybe I'm just stubborn and angry. Maybe. But stubborn and angry are excellent qualities in someone who's fighting fraud. And from what I've seen today, your anger is completely justified. Our appetizers arrived, and we ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. I was trying to wrap my mind around the possibility that the worst 24 hours of my life might actually be the beginning of something better. Ethan, I said finally, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why do you care what happens to me? I mean, I understand why you want your money back from August, and I understand why you'd want to prevent him from defrauding other people. But why do you care whether I build an independent life or whether my family treats me well? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was more careful than it had been before. My younger brother was born with cerebral palsy, he said. Very different situation from yours, obviously, but similar family dynamics. Parents who loved him but were embarrassed by him, siblings who resented the attention his needs required, a whole extended family that always saw his disability first and his personality second. What happened to him? He spent most of his childhood believing he was a burden, believing his worth was measured by how little trouble he caused for everyone else. It took him years to understand that the problem wasn't with him, it was with people who couldn't see past their own shallow priorities. Is he okay now? He's a successful software engineer with a wife and 2 kids and a life that's completely independent from the family that spent 20 years telling him he was too much work. But getting there nearly killed him, literally. The depression, the self-doubt, the constant belief that he wasn't worth loving or supporting. I understood now why Ethan had been so direct about calling my family's priorities screwed up, why he had seemed so immediately understanding of my situation. I'm sorry, I said. That must have been incredibly difficult to watch. It was. And it taught me that sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones who hurt us the most, usually because they're more concerned with how things look than with how things actually are. Our main courses arrived, and we talked about other things for a while. Ethan told me about Cross Investment Group, about the kinds of companies he worked with and the kinds of deals he structured. I told him about my work with Dr. Mills, about the independence training I had been pursuing, about the dreams I had for my life that felt increasingly impossible when I was surrounded by people who saw me as a limitation to be managed. It wasn't until we were waiting for dessert that he brought up the subject I had been dreading. Celine, there's something else I need to tell you about August's situation. Something that affects the timeline of everything we've been discussing. What kind of something? August has been in contact with my lawyers for the past week, asking for extensions and trying to renegotiate the terms of his repayment. But this afternoon, after you mentioned my name to your family, my office received a very interesting phone call. From who? From August's attorney. Apparently, your brother-in-law is now claiming that the $12 million wasn't a loan at all. It was an investment in exchange for equity in Whitfield Development. He's saying that Cross Investment Group is actually a partner in his company, not a creditor. The audacity of that claim was breathtaking. Can he do that? Can he just change the terms of an agreement after the fact? Not legally, no. But he can certainly try, especially if he thinks he can drag things out in court long enough to find another source of funding. The problem is that fighting this kind of claim can take months or even years, and in the meantime, August gets to keep spending money he doesn't have. So, what's the alternative? The alternative is proving that August Whitfield is a serial fraud who has been lying to investors, misappropriating funds, and using false claims about business partnerships to secure money he never intended to repay. The alternative is building a case so airtight that his lawyers won't want to represent him anymore. And you need my help to build that case. I need your help, yes. But Celine, I need you to understand what you'd be signing up for. This isn't just about getting my money back anymore. This is about stopping August before he destroys more people's lives. It's about making sure he faces consequences for what he's done to you, to your family, to all the investors he's defrauded. What kind of consequences? Criminal charges, asset forfeiture, prison time, the complete destruction of his reputation and his ability to continue victimizing people. I thought about August sitting in my family's living room, lecturing me about being an adult while owing $12 million to the man I was having dinner with. I thought about the casual cruelty in his voice when he talked about my need for attention, about the way he had convinced my entire family that I was the problem that needed to be managed. What would you need me to do? Help me gather evidence. Financial records, communications between August and your family, documentation of how Monroe family money has been used to support his business ventures. Help me understand the full scope of how he's been using your family's resources and reputation. And in exchange? In exchange, I help you build the kind of life you actually want. Financial independence, professional opportunities, legal support if your family tries to make things difficult for you. A chance to prove to yourself and everyone else what you're actually capable of when you're not spending all your energy managing other people's expectations. It was an impossible choice, except that it wasn't really a choice at all. I could go back to my family's house, apologize for embarrassing them, accept my exile gracefully, and spend the rest of my life knowing that I had let August Whitfield destroy my relationship with my sister and face no consequences for it. Or I could fight back. Ethan, I said, if we do this, if we go after August the way you're describing, my family is going to hate me forever. They're going to see this as a betrayal, as me choosing revenge over family loyalty. Are you okay with that? I thought about Clara's voice that morning, calling my hurt feelings a tantrum. I thought about my mother threatening to kick me out for refusing to smile while being humiliated. I thought about my father suggesting that my exile was actually a favor to help me pursue independence. Yes, I said. I think I am okay with that. Then we have a deal? We have a deal. But I have one condition. Name it. When this is over, when August is facing consequences for what he's done, I want to be the one who tells Clara the truth about why he married her. I want to be the one who explains to my family how they chose a criminal over their own daughter. I want them to understand exactly what they sacrificed me to protect. Done, Ethan said. Though I should warn you, that conversation is going to be even more painful than the one you had with them today. Maybe, I said. But it's also going to be the last conversation where I'm apologizing for choices that were actually reasonable responses to unreasonable situations. We shook hands across the table, and I felt the same electric shock I had experienced when we met that morning. Except this time, it felt less like surprise and more like recognition. Like my life was finally beginning. 6 weeks later, I stood in front of the mirror in my new apartment, adjusting the neckline of a dress that had cost more than I used to spend on clothes in an entire year. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized, confident, polished, powerful in a way that had nothing to do with other people's approval. The apartment itself was a testament to how completely my life had changed. 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furnished with pieces I had chosen myself rather than inherited from family decorators. It was mine, paid for with the salary Ethan had been paying me for the past month and a half as a consultant for Cross Investment Group. The work had been exactly what he had promised, gathering evidence, following financial trails, using my family connections to uncover the full scope of August's fraud. What I hadn't expected was how good I would be at it, how satisfying it would be to use skills I didn't even know I had to build a case against the man who had orchestrated my humiliation. We had been thorough, methodical, patient. And tonight, at the annual Monroe Foundation Charity Gala, we were going to present our findings to 300 of the city's most influential people, including my parents, my sister, and my brother-in-law who had no idea what was coming. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Car is here. You ready for this?" I was more than ready. I had been ready since the morning Clara kicked me out of her wedding party. I just hadn't known it yet. The Monroe Foundation Gala was exactly the kind of event my family lived for, an opportunity to see and be seen by everyone who mattered in the city's social and business circles. It was held every year at the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, with elaborate decorations, a 5-course dinner, and speeches from local dignitaries about the importance of charitable giving. More importantly, it was the kind of event where everyone expected to hear news about business partnerships, investment opportunities, and major announcements that would affect the city's economic landscape. When Ethan and I walked into the hotel lobby, I heard the familiar sound of a high society crowd in full swing, the clink of champagne glasses, the rustle of expensive clothing, the carefully modulated voices of people who were always performing for each other. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked quietly as we approached the ballroom entrance. "Like I'm about to change everything," I said. "In the best possible way." We had timed our arrival carefully. Not so early that we'd have to make small talk with my family before the evening's program began. Not so late that we'd miss the opportunity to make an entrance. Right at the moment when the cocktail hour was ending and people were beginning to find their seats for dinner. When we walked through the ballroom doors, I felt the same collective gasp I had imagined 6 weeks ago when I pictured walking back into Clara's wedding. Except this time, it was real, and it was even more satisfying than I had imagined. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. I heard my name whispered across the room in tones of surprise, confusion, and barely concealed speculation. Celine Monroe, the invisible sister who had missed her twin's wedding, walking into the most important social event of the year arm in arm with Ethan Cross, one of the most powerful men in the city. "Celine." My mother's voice cut through the ambient noise, sharp with shock. "What are you doing here?" I turned toward her voice, smiling with a confidence that felt as natural as breathing. "Hello, Mother. I'm here with Ethan. We have some business to discuss with the attendees tonight." "Business?" My father appeared beside her, his voice carefully neutral but clearly confused. "What kind of business?" "The kind that affects everyone in this room," Ethan said smoothly. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Monroe. Thank you for hosting such a lovely event." I could see Clara and August approaching through the crowd, and I felt my heart rate spike with anticipation. Clara looked stunning, as always, but there was something strained around her eyes that suggested the past 6 weeks hadn't been as blissful as she had hoped. August looked worse. Older, more haggard, like a man carrying the weight of secrets that were getting heavier by the day. "Celine," Clara said when she reached us, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness. "What a surprise. We didn't know you were coming tonight." "Well, I wasn't planning to come as a guest," I said. "But Ethan asked me to accompany him tonight for his presentation to the foundation board." "Presentation?" August's voice was sharp. "What presentation?" "The one about investment fraud in the luxury development sector," Ethan said calmly. "Very timely topic, given some recent discoveries about how certain developers have been misappropriating investor funds. The color drained from August's face so quickly I thought he might faint. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do, August. We've been corresponding through our attorneys for weeks now. Although I have to say, your latest legal strategy is particularly creative. Legal strategy? Clara looked between her husband and Ethan, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. What legal strategy? August, what is he talking about? Nothing important, August said quickly. Just some business disagreements that will be resolved soon. $12 million seems fairly important to me, I said conversationally. But then again, I'm new to the investment world. Maybe that's considered pocket change among serious business people. Clara's breath caught. $12 million? August, what is she talking about? Before August could answer, the evening's master of ceremonies announced that dinner was being served and guests should find their seats. The crowd began moving toward the tables, but the circle around us remained frozen. Perhaps we should continue this conversation after the formal program, my mother suggested, clearly desperate to avoid a scene in front of 300 witnesses. Actually, Ethan said, the formal program is exactly where this conversation belongs. Mr. Monroe, I believe you'll find that Cross Investment Group is listed as one of tonight's presenters. We're going to be discussing some very important developments in business ethics and investor protection. My father's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and finally, fear. Ethan, surely we can discuss whatever concerns you have privately. We tried private discussions, Richard. August spent 6 weeks having his lawyers tell my lawyers that black was white and up was down. Tonight, we're going to set the record straight. You can't do this, August said, his voice low and desperate. You can't ambush people at a charity event. I'm not ambushing anyone, Ethan replied. I'm fulfilling my obligation as a concerned citizen to warn potential investors about fraudulent business practices. The Monroe Foundation has a responsibility to ensure that the business leaders it celebrates are actually worthy of that honor. Clara grabbed August's arm. What fraudulent business practices? August, tell me what's going on right now. Clara, not here, August hissed. We'll discuss this at home. No, she said, her voice getting louder. We'll discuss this right now. What $12 million? What fraudulent business practices? What haven't you told me? The conversations around us had stopped completely. Everyone within earshot was now openly listening to our exchange, and I could see phones being pulled out as people began recording what was clearly about to become a very public spectacle. Clara, I said gently, maybe you should sit down for this. Don't patronize me, Celine. If you know something I don't know, tell me. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 6 weeks. She was still beautiful, still perfectly dressed, still carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. But there were cracks in the facade now, hairline fractures that suggested the perfect marriage wasn't quite as perfect as it appeared. August owes Ethan $12 million, I said. Money he borrowed to fund business ventures that don't actually exist. Money he's been using to pay off other debts and maintain a lifestyle he can't afford. Money he's been avoiding repaying for almost a year. Clara stared at me, then at August. Is that true? August's silence was answer enough. And, I continued, he's been telling other investors that Cross Investment Group is actually a partner in Whitfield Development, using Ethan's reputation to secure additional funding for projects that exist only on paper. That's not how it happened, August said desperately. The agreement was ambiguous. There were different interpretations of the terms. The agreement was very clear, Ethan said coldly. $12 million, 6-month repayment timeline, 15% interest. There's nothing ambiguous about fraud, August. Fraud. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. You're saying my husband committed fraud? I'm saying your husband has been running a systematic scheme to defraud investors while using your family's money and reputation to cover his tracks, I said. I'm saying he married you for access to the Monroe family fortune, and he convinced all of you to exile me because I was asking inconvenient questions that might have exposed his lies. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning system cycling on. Clara stood there, staring at August, waiting for him to deny what I had just said. He didn't. Clara, he said finally, you have to understand. I was trying to protect us. The business was going through a rough patch, but it was temporary. I just needed time to turn things around. By stealing from investors? By lying to my family? By convincing me to kick my own sister out of our wedding. I never told you to kick Celine out of the wedding. You told me she would complicate the photos. You told me your family had concerns about the optics. You made me choose between my image and my sister, and I chose wrong because I trusted you. Her voice was getting louder with each sentence, and I could see other guests openly gathering around us now, abandoning any pretense of polite disinterest. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced over the sound system, if you could please take your seats, we'll begin this evening's program. Actually, Ethan said, loud enough for his voice to carry across the ballroom, I think we should address the elephant in the room before we move forward with the celebration. He walked over to the microphone at the head of the room, and the master of ceremonies stepped aside without argument. When Ethan spoke, his voice filled the ballroom. Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Ethan Cross, CEO of Cross Investment Group. I'm here tonight because the Monroe Foundation has a responsibility to ensure that the business leaders it honors are actually worthy of that honor. The room was completely silent now, 300 people hanging on every word. 6 weeks ago, I learned that August Whitfield, who has been celebrated in this community as a successful developer and philanthropist, has been systematically defrauding investors while using the Monroe family name and reputation to legitimize his criminal activities. Clara made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Mr. Whitfield owes Cross Investment Group $12 million, money he borrowed under false pretenses, and has been avoiding repaying for almost a year. He has used this money not to fund the business ventures he described in his loan application, but to pay off personal debts and maintain a lifestyle funded by theft. August started walking toward the exit, but several men I recognized as business associates of my father moved to block his path. More seriously, Ethan continued, Mr. Whitfield has been telling other potential investors that Cross Investment Group is a partner in his company, using my reputation to secure additional funding for projects that exist only in his imagination. This is textbook investment fraud, and it stops tonight. He looked directly at August, who was now trapped in the middle of the ballroom with nowhere to run. August Whitfield, you are hereby notified that Cross Investment Group will be filing criminal charges against you tomorrow morning for wire fraud, investment fraud, and theft. We will also be pursuing civil action to recover our funds and any additional damages. The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but Ethan wasn't finished. I want everyone here to understand something important, he said. This investigation was made possible by the courage and intelligence of someone who refused to stay silent when she saw wrongdoing. Someone who chose truth over family loyalty, justice over convenience. He gestured toward me, and I felt every eye in the room turn in my direction. Celine Monroe spent the past 6 weeks helping gather the evidence that will ensure August Whitfield faces consequences for his crimes. She did this despite being exiled from her own family for asking inconvenient questions about her brother-in-law's character. She did this despite being kicked out of her sister's wedding for refusing to pretend that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Clara was openly crying now, but I couldn't tell if it was from shame, grief, or anger. The Monroe family chose to protect a criminal rather than support their own daughter, Ethan said, his voice carrying a weight of judgment that made several people in the audience wince. But Celine Monroe chose justice over comfort, truth over peace, and courage over convenience. She is exactly the kind of person this foundation should be celebrating. He handed the microphone back to the master of ceremonies and walked back to where I was standing. The crowd parted for him like he was royalty, and when he reached me, he offered his arm. "Ready to go?" he asked quietly. "More than ready," I said. As we walked toward the exit, I heard Clara call my name. I turned back to see her standing in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by 300 people who had just watched her perfect marriage explode in real time. "Celine, please," she said. "We need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" I said. "After 6 weeks of silence? After choosing August over me? After letting Mom and Dad kick me out of the house rather than questioning why I might have had good reasons for missing your wedding?" "I didn't know," she said desperately. "I didn't know any of this." "You didn't want to know," I corrected. "There's a difference. You had all the information you needed to figure out that something was wrong with August, but asking questions would have been inconvenient. It would have complicated your perfect image. That's not fair." "What's not fair, Clara, is spending 26 years being the sister who always forgives, always understands, always puts your needs ahead of my own dignity. What's not fair is being kicked out of your wedding party because your husband was worried about optics. What's not fair is being exiled from my own family for refusing to smile while being humiliated." I took a step closer to her, and my voice carried across the silent ballroom. "You chose August over me because you thought he was your ticket to the perfect life. You chose his opinion over my feelings because you thought his money would give you security. Well, congratulations, Clara. You got exactly what you chose." She was sobbing openly now, and I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for her. But sympathy wasn't the same as responsibility, and I was done taking responsibility for other people's choices. "Celine," my mother said, appearing beside Clara, "surely we can work this out as a family." "We're not a family, Mother. We're a business arrangement where I was the unprofitable division that got sold off to protect the more valuable assets. You made that choice 6 weeks ago when you threatened to kick me out for embarrassing the golden couple. Tonight you get to live with the consequences." I turned back toward the exit, where Ethan was waiting patiently for me to finish what I needed to say. "Oh, and Clara?" I called back over my shoulder. "In case you're wondering, this is what choosing myself over your convenience looks like. This is what happens when I stop apologizing for being inconvenient and start demanding the respect I deserve." We walked out of the ballroom together, leaving behind 300 shocked guests, one devastated sister, one exposed criminal, and 2 parents who had just learned what it felt like to be on the wrong side of their daughter's loyalty. The last thing I heard as the ballroom doors closed behind us was August's voice, shrill with panic. "This is all a misunderstanding. We can work this out." But there would be no working it out. Not anymore. Justice, it turned out, was even more satisfying than revenge. 3 months later, I was sitting in my office at Cross Investment Group, reviewing the final paperwork for the Whitfield development case, when my assistant knocked on my door. "Celine? There's someone here to see you. She says she's your sister." I looked up from the documents spread across my desk, bank records, wire transfer receipts, and plea agreements that had taken August from society darling to federal prisoner in less than 90 days. The investigation had uncovered fraud totaling nearly $30 million across multiple investors, with the Monroe family money being just one piece of a much larger criminal enterprise. "Send her in," I said. Clara walked into my office like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, like someone who had spent months learning that the world was a much more dangerous place than she had ever imagined. "Hello, Celine." "Clara. Please sit down." She settled into the chair across from my desk, and I could see her taking in the space, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, the sleek furniture, the awards and certificates on the walls that marked my rapid rise within Cross Investment Group. "This is impressive," she said quietly. "I knew you were working here, but I didn't realize that I was good at it." I finished. That I was actually capable of building something meaningful when I wasn't spending all my energy managing other people's expectations. She winced, but nodded. I deserved that. We sat in silence for a moment, and I waited for her to tell me why she was here. Clara had never been good with apologies, had never been comfortable admitting when she was wrong. Whatever had brought her to my office today had cost her considerable pride. August pleaded guilty, she said finally. I know. 15 years federal prison, full restitution to all victims, forfeiture of all assets acquired through fraudulent means. It was in all the papers. The house is gone. The cars, the jewelry, everything. I'm living with Mom and Dad again, trying to figure out what comes next. I nodded, but didn't offer sympathy. Clara was dealing with the consequences of choices she had made, the same way I had dealt with the consequences of mine. The difference was that my choices had led to a life I was proud of, while hers had led to the complete destruction of everything she thought she wanted. The divorce was finalized last week, she continued. I kept my maiden name, obviously. Turns out being Mrs. August Whitfield isn't exactly the asset I thought it would be. I imagine not. She took a shaky breath. Celine, I need you to know that I've spent the last 3 months thinking about what happened at my wedding, about the choices I made, about how I treated you. And I need you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. Do you? I understand that I chose image over loyalty. I understand that I let August convince me you were a problem to be managed instead of a sister to be protected. I understand that I threw away the most important relationship in my life because I was more concerned with how things looked than with how they actually were. It was the most honest thing Clara had ever said to me, and it should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt sad. All of this pain, all of this destruction, could have been avoided if she had been willing to have this conversation 6 months ago. I also understand, she continued, that apologizing doesn't fix what I broke. That saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the fact that I chose a criminal over my own sister. That admitting I was wrong doesn't earn me forgiveness. Then why are you here, Clara? Because I wanted you to know that you were right about everything. About August, about his motivations, about what kind of person he really was. You saw through him from the beginning, and instead of listening to you, I punished you for asking inconvenient questions. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. And I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. For having the courage to walk away from us when we didn't deserve your loyalty. For building this incredible life for yourself. For refusing to let us convince you that you are the problem. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. That means more than you know. Does it mean enough for you to consider letting me back into your life someday? Not now, I know I don't deserve that now. But someday, when you're ready, if you're ever ready. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone who had been fundamentally changed by the consequences of her choices. The arrogance was gone. The casual entitlement that had characterized our entire relationship was nowhere to be found. In its place was humility, genuine remorse, and what looked like the beginning of wisdom. I don't know, Clara, I said honestly. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm also not the same person I was 6 months ago. I'm not the sister who always forgives, always understands, always puts other people's needs ahead of my own boundaries. I like who I am now, and I'm not willing to go backward to accommodate anyone else's comfort. I wouldn't ask you to, she said quickly. I wouldn't want you to. The person you've become is incredible, Celine. You're stronger, more confident, more successful than I ever imagined you could be. Why would I want you to give that up? Because the person I've become isn't convenient for you. The person I've become asks hard questions and demands real answers. The person I've become doesn't smile and nod when people treat me badly just to keep the peace. Good, she said firmly. That person deserves to be protected, not diminished. I should have been protecting her all along. There was a knock on my door, and Ethan appeared in the doorway. Celine? Sorry to interrupt, but we have the Anderson Industries meeting in 10 minutes. Of course. Clara, this is Ethan Cross. Ethan, my sister Clara. Ethan crossed the room and shook Clara's hand politely. Ms. Monroe, I'm sorry about your circumstances, but I want you to know that your sister has been instrumental in preventing August from victimizing other families the way he victimized yours. I know, Clara said, and I'm grateful for all of it. I should go, she said, standing up. I know you're busy, and I've said what I came to say. She turned toward the door, then stopped. Celine? One more thing. I know you probably won't believe this, but losing you was the worst part of everything that happened. Worse than losing August, worse than losing the house, worse than having to face what a fool I'd been. Losing you was the thing that made me understand what I'd actually given up. After she left, Ethan closed the door and came around to perch on the edge of my desk. How are you feeling? Surprisingly okay, I said. 6 months ago, that conversation would have destroyed me. Today it just felt sad. Like watching someone learn a lesson that could have been avoided if they'd been willing to listen earlier. Do you think you'll rebuild a relationship with her? Maybe. Someday. If she can prove that the changes are real and lasting. But I'm not in any hurry, and I'm not going to compromise the life I've built to make it easier for her. Ethan smiled. Good. You've worked too hard to get here to let anyone pull you backward. The past 3 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. Working with Ethan to build the case against August had revealed skills I didn't know I possessed: analytical thinking, investigative instincts, and a talent for reading people and situations that made me invaluable to cross-investment groups' due diligence process. But more than that, it had revealed who I actually was when I wasn't constantly managing other people's expectations. I was smart, capable, funny, and surprisingly resilient. I was someone worth knowing, worth respecting, worth loving. And Ethan, who had started as an ally in my fight for justice, had become something much more important than that. Speaking of the life I've built, I said, are we still on for dinner tonight? Absolutely. Though I should warn you, I have something I want to discuss with you. Work-related? Life-related, he said, and there was something in his voice that made my heart skip. But it can wait until tonight. The Anderson Industries meeting went well, as most of our meetings did these days. I had developed a reputation within the investment community as someone who could spot potential problems before they became actual disasters, someone who asked the right questions and refused to accept convenient lies as satisfactory answers. It was exactly the kind of professional identity I had always dreamed of having: respected, valued, essential rather than tolerated. That evening, Ethan picked me up at my apartment, and we drove to a small restaurant outside the city that had become one of our favorite places. Quiet, intimate, the kind of place where we could talk without being overheard by colleagues or business associates. So, I said after we had ordered wine and settled into our usual corner table, what did you want to discuss? How would you feel about a promotion? What kind of promotion? Partner. Full partner in cross-investment group, with equity stake and decision-making authority over all major investments. I nearly choked on my wine. Ethan, I've been working there for 3 months. And in those 3 months, you've prevented 4 potential fraud cases, identified 3 undervalued investment opportunities, and saved the company approximately $8 million in bad loans. You've also revolutionized our due diligence process and earned the respect of every major investor in the city. But partner? That's what you've earned, he said firmly. Celine, you're not just good at this work, you're exceptional at it. You see things other people miss, you ask questions other people are afraid to ask, and you have the integrity to walk away from profitable deals when they involve questionable practices. I sat there trying to process what he was offering me. 3 months ago, I had been living in my childhood bedroom, being threatened with eviction for refusing to attend my sister's wedding. Now I was being offered a partnership in one of the most successful investment firms in the country. There's something else, Ethan said. Something more personal. I'm listening. These past 3 months, working with you, getting to know you, watching you build this incredible life for yourself, it's been the best part of my day. Every day. You're brilliant, funny, beautiful, and stronger than anyone I've ever met. My heart was beating so fast I was surprised he couldn't hear it. What I'm trying to say, very badly, is that I've fallen in love with you. Completely, utterly, hopelessly in love with you. And I'm hoping you might feel the same way about me. The words I had been afraid to hope for, afraid to even imagine, were hanging in the air between us. Ethan Cross, who could have any woman in the city, was telling me he loved me. I do, I said quietly. Feel the same way, I mean. I love you too. He reached across the table and took my hand, and I felt that same electric shock I had experienced the first time we touched. Except now I understood what it was: recognition, connection, the feeling of finding someone who saw me exactly as I was and loved me for it rather than despite it. So, he said, partner in business and partner in life? Is that a proposal? Not yet, he said, laughing. I'm many things, Celine, but I'm not presumptuous enough to propose on the same night I offer you a business partnership. Let's start with dinner and see where the evening takes us. But I could see the promise in his eyes, could hear the future in his voice. A future where I was valued, respected, loved completely and unconditionally. A future where my blindness was just one aspect of who I was, not the defining characteristic that determined my worth to others. A future that was entirely my own choice. As we talked over dinner about business plans and personal dreams, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I had been broken by my family's betrayal, devastated by my sister's choice to prioritize image over loyalty. Tonight, I was sitting across from a man who loved me, discussing a business partnership that would make me financially independent for life, planning a future that exceeded my wildest dreams. The woman who had been kicked out of her sister's wedding for being inconvenient had become the woman who walked into her sister's life with a billionaire on her arm and justice in her heart. But more than that, I had become the woman who knew her own worth and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. As Ethan and I walked back to his car after dinner, he pulled me close and kissed me under the streetlights. It was the kind of kiss that promised forever, that spoke of love and partnership and a future built on mutual respect and genuine admiration. I love you, Celine Monroe, he whispered against my ear. I love you too, Ethan Cross, I whispered back. And standing there in the warm evening air, wrapped in the arms of a man who saw me as his equal in every way that mattered, I realized that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the beginning of the best thing that will ever happen to you. Sometimes getting kicked out of the life you thought you wanted is exactly what you need to build the life you actually deserve. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice really is sweeter than revenge. Hey everyone, thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the relationships in your own life or gave you courage to stand up for yourself when it matters, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments below. Stories like this remind us that our worth isn't determined by how convenient we are for other people, and that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to walk away from people who don't value us properly. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Have you ever had to walk away from family or friends who couldn't see your worth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe because I'll be back next week with another tale of justice, transformation, and people who refuse to let others define their worth. Until then, remember, you are not responsible for other people's comfort with your boundaries. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And you are absolutely worth fighting for, especially when the person you're fighting is yourself. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.